Sometimes I see some parents who do stay at home, who just go to all these events, and I kind of feel bad. I kind of feel guilty that I'm not part of all this. Sometimes your kids are like, hey, why didn't you come to my thing? Like, how do you manage expectations?
I feel like we parent to guilt. And so I have this no regrets model of parenting, which is, if you didn't spend enough time or you missed something, like how do you double down the next time and spend more time? How do you, make it up? And sometimes I tell the kids, hey, look, I'm traveling that week. I can't do X, but dad will be there. Do I wish that I didn't have to say that? I wish these things didn't happen. But at the same time, that's the reality. And so, one of us tries to be available at all times. Like when the kids were young, I rarely ever traveled. But, when they got a little older and I freed up my schedule a little bit more, I was able to travel a little bit more for work. But that also meant some conferences. And so, we make choices. And I don't want us to spend our time looking backwards. I want us to spend our time looking forward to what's next for our relationship.
Okay, welcome everyone. My guest today is Deb Liu. Deb is the CEO of Ancestry and former VP of product at Facebook. But today I'm really excited to talk to Deb about a more personal topic, how to survive and thrive as a working parent and have good relationships with your spouse, your own elderly parents, and also your kids. So welcome, Deb.
Thank you, Peter. This is a very important topic and one close to my heart.
Yes, great. So let's talk about building a great relationship with our spouse first. You have this great post about how marriage should be a 60-60 relationship. And can you share more about what that means for you and David, who's your husband?
Yeah, so I met David when I was 18, my first weekend in college, and we started dating when I was about 19. And we decided to embark on our marriage by actually learning about marriage. By the way, I write in my book that people spend more time planning their wedding than they plan their marriage. Mm-hmm. And so we decided we were going to plan out our marriage. We went to a number of, we had pre-marriage counseling for a long time. We also went to a number of marriage retreats to try to understand the mechanics of this thing called marriage. And at one of these retreats, I remember someone saying, we have a 60-60 marriage. This whole 50-50 thing is wrong because you're constantly rubbing up against each other, trying to figure out who did exactly 50%. But if you have a 60-60 marriage, it means you're doing 60%, but the other person's doing 60%. And there's a lot of abundance in your marriage. And that's something we have adopted over the years.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's good before you get married, obviously, to have a discussion. But, when both parents are busy working, they have busy tech jobs and they have kids to raise, at least for me, it's really easy to fall into a trap of like, I did more chores on this day than you. So like, you need to help me out or something. Like, how do you guys get past this in like day life?
Well, it's funny, actually, I calculated because my husband's like, you're traveling a lot this year. And I actually looked at the number of trips and places I've been this year. And for the full year, I think I'll have gone to 23 places. So I'm traveling half the time, which is a lot. I don't travel the whole week, but it's usually Monday through Wednesday or Monday through Thursday. So it's a lot for him. But I think it's really important as you think about your relationship is not to bean count. It's not, I did this, therefore you did that. We actually have something we call a swim lane in our marriage. And so if one of us does something, we commit to doing something, we do it all the way. But the other person doesn't get to complain. And I think that helps a lot because, we know who's responsible. So there is no kind of different line. So, for example, he does all the grocery shopping. So he goes to Costco once a week and buys all the food. I have no idea what he's going to buy. When it comes home, I do all the cooking. And the cooking, is based on what he buys, but he never gets to complain. And, but we know each other so well now that it's an ebb and flow. When we go on vacation, he spends months planning our vacations. And then he hands me a Google Doc and says, here's where you need to be. And I got it put on your calendar. Yeah. But my job is to make sure that our kids are all packed and ready to go. And so again, don't get to complain. I have done many whitewater rafting trips. I've zip-lined many places, hiked many places that I am not an outdoors person, but he loves this sort of thing. But the no complaints rule applies to that too. But I think it's that trusting each other, knowing each other, and being able to have a relationship where it's ebb and flow, it's a yin and yang, where when you're in harmony, you feel it.
Yeah, and I think part of it is also like, nobody's perfect and there's always pet peeves that we find in our spouses. Like my example is, I complain that my wife takes her time getting ready or like to go out. And then my wife complains that like I rush things too much and like I tend to do stuff. So yeah, I don't know if that's your experience too, just like getting
absolutely. The other day, so all of our trash always goes out to the curb. He makes sure it's taken out. He always pulls the cans back. But he never empties the recycling even when it's full because it's not time yet. Yeah. And so I just keep creating new boxes of recycling as I'm cleaning our house. And I'm like, I don't know, the box of recycling looks pretty full, but it always gets taken out on Wednesday night. And he always ensures that it's recycled. But like that pile. And so you kind of just have to pick and choose your battles. And for us, it's not worth the fight. And so we just, I just keep creating boxes and hinting at him, and then he gets it done when he gets it done. But it does create a much better relationship where we're not managing each other.
Yeah, you don't want to manage each other in your personal relationship. And I also find that sometimes when I go on my way to help my wife, like she definitely reciprocates like a couple days later. Like last night, my toddler was like screaming her head off and my wife was dealing with her. And I had this thought process. I was like, hey, should I just stay up with my older daughter or should I actually go down and help her? And actually like went down and help her. And I think, she definitely appreciates moments like that. Yeah. So what about when, like in really stressful moments or like, hopefully there aren't too many arguments, but I find it interesting how, or at least in my personal experience, most people have one-on-ones with their manager and they talk about like growing their career and stuff. And like, I don't know, I found it kind of awkward to actually have a one-on-one with my spouse, but sometimes you do have to sit down and like talk it out for like 30 minutes or something. Like, how do you have a system for that or?
So for a long time, we would go for a walk every night. And it was a great way to kind of get a chance to reconnect with each other, especially when we had young kids. And my mom lived with us. And even though she was sick for a long time, she was able to stay with the kids. And that gave us the opportunity to go out, and walk every single night. Now we have a dog. And so I walk with my daughter for the most part. But once or twice a week, he and I will go for a walk. And it's a good reminder that you have to reconnect, that you're not just parents. And we talk about kind of the things that things are working, the things that aren't working, and also what's on our mind. The other thing we do is we call it conscious renegotiation. By the way, when you name something, when you do it, it's not kind of, we need to talk about something. No, we say it's time for conscious renegotiation. And so where we renegotiate the chores. One example was last October, I came home from a super long trip. It was like, I was exhausted. I come home and he said, well, we have two things we need to do. We need to finish our taxes and we need to get our son into college. Which one do you want to do? And I said, I'd rather get our son into college. The next morning I woke up and he's like, actually, you're on the board of Intuit. You are doing our taxes. I will help our son get into college. And, I spent, I don't know how many hours because our paperwork was everywhere. And, by the time I got it done, I was exhausted. But you know what? We sat down as we usually do. And we do 1 hour look through before we submit it. And he's like, okay, this is great. Same thing with our son going to college. I read his final essay, looked at it, and then he submitted it, got into his first choice school, early decision, and we were done. But I never spent any time on it. But we trust each other completely. And when we negotiate something like that, we know that we own it completely. Just like you would not nag your coworkers to get things done. Like, when are you going to get this done? Did you finish this thing? You would never do that, right? You trust each other. And the same thing as a product manager, for example, like you wouldn't go to your engineer, well, how far are you in the coding? What is this done? What is this done? This is done. You would say, hey, are we going to make the deadline? Great. I look forward to actually doing the product review. Those types of things, right?
Got it. Yeah. And it makes sense for you to do the taxes. Yeah, you are at the board of Intuit. So like you kind of trust each other. Like different spouses are different things, so that makes sense. Yeah. What happens if, one spouse is just like more busy at work than the other? Like, I'm sure like you're really busy. I'm not sure what your husband does, but like, how can you still give 60 to the family, or is it kind of like a more broader trade-off that happens?
Yeah. And when we talk about conscious renegotiation, it has a lot to do with where we are in our careers. When I had kids, I went part-time. And so I did a lot more stuff at home, took care of everything. For example, when he used to do the mail, and then the minute I went on maternity leave, I started checking the mail. And by the way, my son is 18 and I'm still actually going through the mail every day. I have not gotten rid of that responsibility. But, because I was home. Like I was home Fridays and I was working even when I went back to work after 6 months, I was working 4 days a week. And so I had a lot of flexibility and a lot of support. But he was working like crazy at Google at the time. And so, it just is that season of our life when I had more time and then he had less time. But now, he works at a startup, and so it ebbs and flows. It's like super busy, then it flows down. It's super busy and it flows down. Whereas I travel a ton and I'm busy all the time. It seems. But at the same time, it's really important that we work on, supporting each other. And so, for example, he takes care of the carpool on Thursdays and Tuesdays. He ensures that our kids get to the, math camp and math program and things like that. He does a lot of the things where you have to physically be at home to take them places. And I take care of a lot of things that you can do offline, basically, or online, basically, and not have to physically be there.
Got it. That makes sense. I mean, I think it's just really tough being two working parents. You almost have to be two working parents living in the Bay Area to a certain extent. And maybe we can talk about how the world isn't really set up for two working parents.
Yeah, I mean,
what does that
that's
mean?
absolutely true. It's interesting, by the way, we set up a school system, especially public school. So, the world isn't set up for two working parents. I think it's really important that we realize that. Like public schools, for example, will have a publishing party at 10 a.m., or we have parent teacher conferences, but it's at like noon. How do you actually get that done, right? They have concerts, but you have to drop the kids off at 3 and go back at 4. Like, it's maddening. In the same time, in our school system here, there's no public transportation. There's no buses. And so you have to drop off your kids until they're old enough to bike to school. And so again, who's picking them up at 2:15? And by the way, school ends at different times and different days. Crazy.
Exactly.
In elementary school and part of middle school, there's like early dismissal. And so suddenly you're thrown in for a loop. And at one point in our lives, we had 3 kids in 4 schools because they were in elementary, middle, and high school. They went to an after school Chinese school. And just some logistics of getting people all the places at the right time was really hard. And we were very lucky to have supportive parents. But if you don't have parents, around, how do you do it? What can you do? And we had a lot of help as well, but that is really impossible. And I think that we won't acknowledge that. I think we just pretend that it just secretly happens, but it's not. I think we should talk about these things more. And by the way, 70% of women with children under 18 actually do work mostly full-time or at least significant amount of part-time.
Yeah, like I tweeted this random thing saying like the only parenting hack is to live close to your grandparents. and then it went like, this is so true, right?
So my in-law lived here in 2016, and it did make our lives a lot easier because when somebody got sick, there was somebody to pick them up because we were like, who's gonna go? Like, which one of us can cancel all of our meetings this afternoon and show up? And there was just so many of those things. And so I do think that by the way, the parents that do have help don't talk about it enough. So it makes it feel like the parents who don't have help are failing. And so I talk a lot about the help that we've had because I can't be. I couldn't have done what I've done in my career without significant amount of help from my family. But also, I talk about this very widely too. For a long time, getting the kids to school in the morning. Mornings were the most stressful hour of our day. Getting 3 kids ready for school when somebody has lost their shoe and someone's homework is missing. And, and finally, our nanny when we had, since my son was born, had retired. And I begged her to come back just 1 hour a day to take them to school. And she came, and then suddenly our mornings were totally different. Yeah. She actually came, she cooked them breakfast, as opposed to us throwing like a cereal bar at them on the way out the door. She cooked them breakfast, she made their everything, and then she drove them to school. And suddenly our mornings were completely different. And yes, it was an investment. It was expensive. But at the same time, I don't think that we would have had the careers we not had that level of support. And she was like their third grandmother. And, when she passed, we really missed her. But I think just having her and towards the end of her life, be able to spend that time with my kids was really precious to both them and to us.
Wow. Okay. Oh, wow. So your nanny actually passed away too?
Yeah, she passed away, suddenly. But she was such a grandmother to them. And she was such a part of our family that when she left, when she retired, we were so sad. So actually being able to spend the last couple of years just seeing them in the mornings, was really precious to us. And, we lost her too soon, unfortunately.
Wow. Yeah, I have the same story. Like I'm jealous of people who like talk about like, oh, I'm gonna wake up, I'm gonna have a cold shower, and I'm gonna meditate. Like my mornings are insane. Just like getting the kids to get up and like cooking breakfast, making lunch.
By the way, I wish people would talk about this more, but I think we judge people who have help because we say, well, you've had all this help, therefore, but not everyone can do that. But if we don't talk about the help we had, then for those who don't see that invisible help, think that they're failing. And I just think that's really unfair to those who don't see the invisible work that's done by people's families. People are able to hire somebody in the morning. I share that widely because I want people to see that you don't just succeed on your own. You have so many people who help you. And, I've been very blessed to have family. At the same time, I've had to take care of that family, in the sandwich generation. And so it's been both a blessing, but also something that we've really struggled with too.
Yeah, I totally agree. People ask me like, how do you have a job and like do this newsletter thing? And like my answer is like, my wife's parents helps cook dinner for us. They help take care of kids. I mean, that's the truth. Otherwise, I would not have time for any of this stuff. Yeah. But like, how do you, just to wrap this up, like how do sometimes, like you said, the school system doesn't care like that you're working. And they were like, oh, they were like a Halloween parade at 10 a.m. or like, they were like a concert at 2 p.m. And then sometimes I see some parents who do stay at home who just go to all these events. I kind of feel bad. I kind of feel guilty that I'm not part of all this. So I guess like, how do you deal with this? Or like sometimes your kids are like, hey, why didn't you come to my thing? Like, how do you manage expectations? Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. When our son was born, in one of our walks, we said, I feel like we parent through guilt. And I said, I don't want to do that. And so I have this no regrets model of parenting, which is, you know, if you didn't spend enough time or you missed something, like how do you double down the next time and spend more time? How do you, make it up? And I think that's really important that we don't spend our time looking backwards, but spend our time looking forward to what the next thing is that we can do. And sometimes I tell the kids, hey, look, I'm traveling that week. I can't do X, but Dad will be there. Like, let's do something special together. Do I wish that I didn't have to say that? I wish these things didn't happen. But at the same time, that's the reality. And so, one of us tries to be available at all times. Like when the kids were young, I rarely ever traveled. Actually, and I avoided travel like the plague for many years when the kids were young. And I worked purposely on that. But, when they got a little older, I freed up my schedule a little bit more. I was able to travel a little bit more for work, but that also meant some compromises. And so, we make choices, and I don't want us to spend our time looking backwards. I want us to spend our time looking forward to what's next for our relationship.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, maybe at some point the kids are like, Mommy, I don't want to hang out with you. I have my own friends to hang out with. Yeah. But I do think one thing I'm guilty of is like, sometimes when I do spend time with them at night, like I'm distracted. I'm like on my phone or like checking emails or something. And like, it's really hard. Like the phone is like a vampire. It just sucks up all your energy. So I should have put it somewhere else. Yeah.
Well, what I tell people is like, have rituals. For us, dinner together every night. That is something we sit down, we have dinner. And so whatever time of the day is, we make time for that. We have game nights, we have movie night. And those are times we spend together, just purely us. And we, do not have our phones, and we have an opportunity to spend time. And I think it's important that you have those touchstones, because that's what the kids remember. They remember things where you spent the time, you invested the time with them.
Yeah, and they'll remember if you pretend to spend time with them, but you're actually checking your phone. They'll remember all that too.
That's right.
So,
the other thing is granting. Like, we say this is like phone-free time. This is dinner time. Like, we actually take the time to do that and actually like reminding them. And so it is really important.
Got it. So, let's talk about the sandwich generation, right? So basically what it means is I think you have kids, you have young kids, and you also have aging parents at the same time. And it's actually a pretty large phase of our lives, right? It's like, I don't know, it's like 10 years, or how long do you feel like you were part of the sandwich generation?
Yeah, and so when my dad passed away, my daughter my youngest, she just turned 15, was born. And my mom moved in with us. So she lived with us for almost 12 years during that time. And then for the last 8 years, she was fighting cancer. So she had stage 4 cancer for a long time, and she defied the odds. And, for 8 years, and she recently passed away. In 2016, my in-laws moved over, my husband's only child, and we wanted to spend more time with them. But it was just really hard to haul the kids across the country in North Carolina 2 or 3 times a year. So finally we asked them, do you want to move? And they agreed to move, and they live in our old house. And we were able to see them pretty regularly, and they were able to spend a lot of time with their kids.
That's awesome. Yeah.
But my father-in-law was in the hospital for 7 months in ICU. My mother-in-law passed away as well last year. And so, we lost all 3 of them in a 9-month period. But during that time, we were able to spend time with them, but it was also really insane. Like, especially during COVID, where they couldn't get any help. My mom had a caregiver that came kind of a couple hours a day to help her. Like driving her to appointments, getting the kids ready. Like, it was just, it was really stressful. And I think that I appreciate the time we were able to spend together, but it was also like, when there's an emergency, like my mom broke her knee, and suddenly like our plans were completely upended because she couldn't walk for, months, and she had to get surgery. So there's just a lot that it's, I feel like we my sister and I talked about how like we were one fall away from disaster all the time.
Yeah.
As they get older, they were just less steady. There was just so much on our minds. But I do appreciate that I got that chance to spend time with her. And like, she taught me how to cook a lot of things. And so when she stopped cooking, I was able to cook the meals that, she used to do when I was a kid. So I do appreciate that we had that time, but it was hard. Sometimes they were able to help, but sometimes we were helping them. And it was just, something's wrong. And so it is a kind of give and take in any relationship. And so it was really hard to lose them because we were all so close. And, I wish that we had more time with them.
I do think like, I don't know if it's like an Asian thing, but I do think like our parents, our elderly parents, like they not only raised us, but they also basically helped raise our kids. So I guess to me is like, I don't want to talk about guilt, but like I feel like double guilty because they really, without them, we would,
Yeah.
not good.
I love the multi-generational household. I know it's not for everybody, but we were actually building a house so all 8 of us could live together in the same house. And it's still not done. So we're still working on it. But, unfortunately, we lost 3 of them. And my son is now in college. And my son joked, moving into an 8-person house with 4 people. Unfortunately, we weren't able to. But they lived down the street for many years. And my mom lived in our house for the last dozen years. And it was really a precious time because they did help raise the kids. They taught them a lot of things. They, cooked them their favorite meals. They were able to kind of, spend time with them as well.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. And I'm not so sure about the in-laws and your own parents living in the same house. It depends on if they get along or not. But like,
they do. Actually, my in-laws and my parents were friends. We used to travel with both of them, both sets of parents all the time. And they were really close to each other. So it was actually great to have, people that they could talk to and of the same age that shared something.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's not always the case with the in-laws. So
that's not always the case. I hear a lot of stories, the crazy in-law stories, but actually I have amazing in-laws and I have amazing parents.
Got it. So do you have any advice for folks like maybe in their late 30s or early 40s who like are getting ready for this like really hectic period of their time, right? Because like you have a demanding job, you have parents are getting older, and then you have these kids. Is it just about moving everyone close together, or do you have any advice?
That helps. I think that helps. I actually think. Well, first, I just think we've lost the concept of the village, right?
Yeah.
Like we live in isolated communities. Like who can take care of your dog if you went on vacation? Who could watch your kids if you had an emergency? Like we just don't have that same list of you could just drop off your kids someplace. And I wish we had more of that community. And I think, that isolation is actually not doing us good. That if you had an emergency, who are the 3 people you would call? Yeah. And, I think it's really having that community, do you have so for us, it's our Bible study. Like if anything ever happened, we would just call them, right? And they would, they could drop their kids off anytime. But it's, who's that community for you? And, whether it's your in-laws, whether it's people you're related to, I just think you've got to find that community, find that family that you need. And whether it's a chosen family or a family that you were born with, I think it's so precious. And I think we lose track of that and we don't realize how important that is until you need help.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, when I was younger, like I wanted to move away from my parents, right? Like strike out on my own. But now I realize that actually, just having family, I mean, if family is a source of all happiness or most happiness, then having your family around makes a huge difference. So, yeah. And then just going back to our kind of like the elderly parents, like I mentioned, I kind of feel like an obligation to try to make them happy, or like I want to make them happy. And what's the best way to, take care of our parents as they get older? I guess it depends on the parent, right? Yeah.
Well, I think part of it is, they want independence, right? They want to have that independence, but they also want to be able to spend time with you. And so making that time. So, for example, every Sunday night we had dinner with my in-laws, no matter what. We would see them multiple times during the week, but it was just nice to like sit down and have a meal. And so my mother-in-law, who's an amazing cook, she would cook the best food, would then give me the recipe. And now I cook a lot of the recipes. I was always afraid to try it when she was living because I was afraid I'd screw it up. But afterwards, I had to redo all the recipes because I think she's an intuitive cook. But she wrote it down. I'm like, I don't know, a sprinkle of salt seems, what is that? So that just being able to have that, have that time that they had favorite foods that she made that I can now carry on that tradition is so important. Yeah. And what they want is to be appreciated and for you to spend time most of all. And so that was really precious to us.
Yeah. And like sometimes they do I feel like they care more about my kids than me, but like that's part of a course.
They want to hang out with the kids too.
And how about like, get a little bit more serious? Like how about, parents get older, eventually they kind of pass away. How do you kind of, and I try not to think about this, but it's going to happen at some point, right? And it has happened to your family. How do you get ready for this or like deal with the grief?
We want our parents are invincible in our own minds, right? Mm-hmm. Until they're not. And so, it just seems like there's never going to be a day when we won't have them. And, I lost my dad and, as I said, like about 12, 13 years ago. And, losing my mom and my in-laws all at the same time was hard. Oh, like it was just I think it was really hard for my kids, particularly as well. But I also appreciate that we got to spend the last years of their lives seeing them all the time. Like when they lived, so my parents lived in Georgia, my in-laws lived in North Carolina. Like we just would see them 2 weeks at a time, twice a year. So now we can we appreciate it being able to see them all the time. And so appreciate that time you have together because it's not always going to be there. Have them tell stories of their lives because you aren't going to ever have those stories told to you again. I tried to scan my mom's photos towards the end of her life so she'd tell me who's in these photos. And by the time I got them back, she had passed away. So I sent them away to be scanned. I started uploading to Ancestry. And, I never got a chance to finish this someday project. And so don't think about, for me, that someday came too fast in a lot of ways. And so don't wait till that someday to do those things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like our parents have really great stories to tell, like stories of courage. I kind of had a coddled childhood. Well, my parents moved here. They didn't have any money. They had to fight and claw their way to actually do anything. So yeah, I wish they shared these stories more with my kids to kind of learn, to kind of build courage in our kids. Yeah.
Yeah. And towards the end of their lives, actually, we had 2 of our kids talk to their grandparents. And my daughter was doing this essay project for the Chinese American Museum. And she interviewed her grandmother about what it was like to come to America with nothing. And to just go across the country and have no idea where she was going. She'd never been in the country. And, she was like, and what my daughter took away was my mother-in-law was so grateful for what this country meant to her. And she just had such a love of America that, it was very hard for even young people to imagine, right? Because nowadays it's cool to say these are all the problems. But she just said, I lived the American dream. And my parents felt that way too. And so I just feel like we, just hearing their story and their struggles and, the lives that they led were just, so important because they had never told that story to us. Yeah. And even looking at the after effects, we've been going through their artifacts and all of their things. I found a letter from my father-in-law from NC State where he eventually enrolled, and they said, "We're sorry, but you can't enroll here because you're getting here too late." We didn't realize that he had a letter from UCLA that, he was going to go there. And it just things that they never told us are in their artifacts. And I just wish we had a chance to, I found it in some box with some old clothing and some, towels. And I thought, I never knew this about them, Yeah.
I think it's like you mentioned, showing genuine interest in their story and actually asking them to tell the stuff. Because it's very easy for just to, have them watch TV or something. Their own thing. Yeah, so that's really important. I think my dad wrote some love letters to my mom somewhere in a box. I'll pull them up at some point.
Yes.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah. So last topic, you've had a really successful career yourself. How do you think about, do you have any advice for me or anyone else listening to this? How do you raise really good kids? Do you have any principles when it comes to raising kids or what do you do? Yeah.
One of the things is the say-do ratio matters a lot. What you say and what you do is one of the most important things. And, being consistent. But when you make a mistake, apologize. When you get upset and it wasn't fair, just say, hey, I'm sorry. Teach them that your parents are human and they're not invincible. And I think that's so important. The other part is really learning to listen. One of the things I recently started doing with my middle child, Bethany, was we started writing a column together. It's called The Tiger Mom and Her Cub. And she has a lot of thoughts about everything, like dating, about, her grandmother's funeral, recently about college applications. And then her little sister, Danielle, she wrote about, our traditions, our Christmas and birthday celebrations, because it was her birthday recently. And so really just seeing their point of view from their eyes written out is so interesting. Things that you would never really talk about. And so, do you think what we do is strange? For example, my parents never celebrated Santa Claus Christmas because we're Christian, but they didn't really understand this concept of Santa Claus because that's not really a thing. And so we never had the kids, believe that Santa Claus was real. And, and our kids just always thought that was normal. We just said, just don't tell the other. And so, I was interested in seeing what they thought about it. And for them, it was just every day, right? Which is, and so just really seeing their point of view and asking them their point of view is really important. There's a great book I read once. It was How to Talk to Your Kids So They Will Listen and How to Listen to Your Kids So They Will Talk.
That's right.
It shares some of these techniques, and I think it's very useful.
How did you get your daughter to want to write a column with you? Is just kind of like a family exercise?
I was telling you, she started that essay contest with her mother, with my mother-in-law, so her grandmother. And after she wrote it, she got honorable mention. And then she and her grandmother decided they wanted to write a column together. Unfortunately, my mother-in-law got sick and passed away very quickly right after that. And so she said, I still want to write the column, but I want to do it with you. And I said, whoa, okay. And she wanted to do one with her grandmother about bridging the generations and asking her grandmother questions. And so I said, what do you want our column to be about? And she's like, we can debate interesting topics. And I'm like, okay. So we pick topics and they're, about getting a dog, maybe a second dog, we talk about all of her feelings, about all of the things she wants to talk about. And it's really interesting to hear how much pressure she feels about going to college, for example, because the schools we went to and how successful we've been. She said, it's a lot of burden on us. She's a junior in high school, so it's top of mind, and so, how she and her brother reacted to our pressure, and so it is very interesting to see her point of view. And it's been a really rewarding experience because suddenly you see the world totally differently.
Interesting. And it probably also helps her process her own thinking. Writing out process strategy helps you process stuff, right? So it probably helps on that too.
It really does. Actually, the way we write the column is we go for a walk. So we walk the dog in the evening and we talk about the topic and we debate it. And then she will go write the beginning. And then I will write the next section, and she will write the next section, and I will write the next section. And then she goes back and edits it. And it's so interesting because you can see the evolution of thinking from the time we talk about it to the time we write it.
And do you just keep this to yourself, or you kind of show the rest of your family?
No, we published it on ASM News, Asian American News, and we also published it on LinkedIn. So, if you want to read it, it's called Tiger Mom and Her Cub.
Okay, all right. I'm going to check it out. That's awesome.
You have to check it out.
That's awesome. Tiger Mom. So that's the quick question on being a Tiger Mom. I think as accomplished parents, we want our kids to be, I guess, accomplished. But how do you balance that with letting them pursue their own interests? It's just hard for Tiger moms, right? Or Tiger dads. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like there was a time when I was pushing too hard. And finally I said to my daughter and to my son, I said, this is when, they're going into high school. How much do you want me to push you? How much do you want this? Because I don't want to push you so hard that you rebel, but I also don't want you to, not push yourself. And my son was like, I do want you to push me, but I don't want us to get in fights all the time, which is helpful. My daughter, actually, she said, okay, 7, 8. And then she goes, actually, I want to dial it back to a 6, And so I think at different points, it's been a different place. But I do want them to feel like I'm, there was a book I read a long time ago. It's called something like The Carpenter and the Gardener, where you can be like a carpenter and you're sawing down your kids and you're forming them into some sort of furniture in the shape of what you want. But the gardener is somebody who's actually, cultivating, right? Hey, maybe they're tomatoes or maybe they're orchids or maybe there's something else, but you're actually making them grow. Now, they can't stagnate. The gardener is there to help you grow. So you can't just not do anything, but you have to cultivate, you have to invest, you have to spend time. And so that those two analogies are a way to think about parenthood, that a carpenter is about shaping your kids into what you want. A gardener is about helping them grow to who they want to be and maximizing them. And that analogy is as apt for parenting, which is as a Tiger parent, as any parent, you want your kids to grow. You are there to make sure that they're not stagnating, they're not wilting. But at the same time, you don't want to push so hard that it's actually destructive.
I think that's a really good analogy because I think your kids might not be interested in the same thing that you are. And if they're not interested in it, then it's very hard for them to be really good at it, So I feel like you have to expose them because I'm not sure about you, but parents in the Bay Area, they send their kids to 5 different activities every weekend. and you have to figure out what your kids actually generate interesting and kind of have them follow their curiosity. I think that's what I kind of realized. Yeah.
Yeah. But also I want to teach the kids grit. So, they had to all play an instrument and they all had to try a sport. Right. But if they quit, they had to negotiate with us with what they were going to replace it with. So recently my daughter wanted to quit piano. She's in 8th grade and she said, I just am not enjoying it that much anymore. And I said, okay, if you're going to, and so by the way, Dad's the piano parent. So I said, okay, here's how you negotiate with Dad. I am going to agree to take this classic math class. So he wanted her to take a geometry class and do Rose debate and model UN. And she needed to go to him and say, hey, I'm doing model UN and Rose debate, which you wanted to do. Mom wanted me to do this math class. I will do those 3 things, but I really need to quit piano because there's too many activities. Because she also does Chinese school on Thursdays. So every night was booked.
Yeah.
And so, so she said, hey, Dad, and she actually talked him into it, right? That I taught her how to negotiate with him. That she said, I put my time in, I learned how to play, so I know how to play, but I want to replace it with this other thing. And so, teaching her the skills to actually navigate her own decision making. But, in the end, my husband makes the call on piano. So you have to say yes.
That's funny. I mean, negotiation itself is a really important skill. I mean, maybe we don't want them to become too good at it. So it's just
no, but it's actually an amazing skill for life, actually, to be able to ask for what you want, but then also offer something that the other person wants in exchange for that.
Yeah, exactly. That's like an important skill. Yeah. So having been on this journey, like, are your kids going to their first choice college or something? And like, you're like a successful CEO yourself. Looking back, what are you like really proud of? And like, do you have any like closing words of advice on like balancing career and family and all this stuff?
Well, I think it wasn't, by the way, for my son, it was his first choice college, but it was not my first choice college for him.
Oh, really?
And so the most important, so he went to go to Boston College and he wanted to early decision. I had wanted him to apply to a number of schools. And he said, Mom, I don't want to do this your way. I want you to let me do this my way.
Got it.
And it was hard because I wanted him to apply to Duke. That's where I went. And he just said, look, this is where I want to go. I want to place with an undergraduate business degree. He had struggled with some anxiety during COVID. So there was, he had some challenges. And so I was really proud that he came to me and said, this is what I want. And I want you to back off. And so in a lot of ways, that is a proud parenting moment. Also a moment when I was like, but I want you to go to Duke. But I think, you want them to have that moment when they say, this is how I want to live my life. And I need you to support me. And so, in some ways is balancing that disappointment with also being proud that he was able to mark his ground and say, this is what I want. I don't want your help. I want to do this on my own. And, I really appreciated that he was willing to say that. And so I do think that as a parent, those moments are what you're working towards in a lot of ways is you want them. The whole point of, cultivating them is so they'll be independent, right? And so that they would live their dreams and not yours. And, unfortunately, none of my kids want to be engineers. I studied engineering. I had hoped, even when my husband was I think he had graduated from Harvard Law School, and his dad said to him, it's never too late to go back and get an engineering degree so you have something to fall back on. And he's like, but I'm a lawyer.
Yeah. That's funny.
And he goes, but if that doesn't work out, I was like, okay. He said, well, I married Deb and she has an engineering degree, so that's okay. But I think one of the things that's super important is really helping your kids and find their passion and what success looks like for them. And then from a parenting point of view, is that your job is both short and long, right? In a lot of ways, 18 years seems like a long time. And in so many ways, it seems really short too.
Yeah.
And so the time you do have influence, it's really cultivating that relationship and building a relationship where they can come to you and say whatever they want to say, and it's okay. And that you support them in whatever they want to do.
I love that advice because I think that independent thinking is really important because it's very easy in college or wherever to just like do what all the other kids are doing, right? And if they actually have their own independent curiosity or thinking, like they'll actually go in their own path, Yes. Like I became a banker for a summer and I hate it because everyone else was just doing banking. So yeah, great. Well, thanks so much, Deb. This is an awesome conversation. I feel like I learned a lot. Hopefully I can become as good a parent as you.
I want to say, I think the people who are going to give me the performance review are the 3 kids, and I'm not sure what they're going to say.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes.
Cool.
So thank you. This was great. I just hope all parents and you realize that, this is the most important job that you have. You're replaceable at work, but at home you're not.
Yeah, it's the most impactful. Like you can try to grow some product for like 1 million users or 1 billion users, but ultimately it's the 3 people in your life that matter the most. Yeah,
absolutely.
And where can people read more your awesome writing on family and parenting? Yeah.
We'll say Deb Liu Substack, deblu.substack. I have a newsletter and I post on LinkedIn a little bit of summary of that, and you can follow me there.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.